This community is not just corporate. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of the PerformHappy podcast, where today my guest is Dr. Carl Bescoby, aka the injury psychologist. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'd love to know what brought you to this specific part of psychology, this little piece of there's so many things that you can study. Why injuries?
Yeah, and it's a really great question. And my journey to where I am today is quite a long one, but it started in sport. I was an athlete. I played rugby for a good part of my early career, if you like. And I experienced a lot of injuries, as do many people in different sports. It wasn't unique to me. I wasn't special in any way, but at the same time, I was studying psychology, and I was also going through a lot of stresses in my life at that point, and kind of wanted to understand a little bit more as to why and what the link was between kind of psychology, coping, and injury. So it set me off on a path to continue studying. I stopped playing rugby, retired from sport, and kind of directed my effort and emphasis into education and understanding a little bit more about the psychology. So yeah, I went on that route to become, I guess, a sport and exercise psychologist by training. And ever since I started that, I really focused in on injury and rehabilitation, trying to understand a little bit more about what goes on psychologically, and how we can best support athletes with the mental side. So yeah, that journey found me going through the education system, and then I did a PhD at the University of Bath, where I focused a little bit away from sport in illness and rehabilitation with kind of chronic illness and transplant recipients. But they gave me a little bit more of a perspective onto how we manage setbacks, how we manage big challenges in our life. And yeah, decided to dedicate my practice to supporting others going through similar challenges.
Great. So, and that's so cool that you knew you wanted to work with athletes, but you went a different direction so you could really get into that rehab mindset, I would say. And do you notice, I mean, I'm sure that you do, that there's a difference between people who rehab very effectively and people who are never the same? You know, are there critical differences that people really want to tap into if they're struggling with an injury?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the kind of number one thing is that injuries are complex physically, absolutely, but there is a really profound and complex link between psychology. And often when we find ourselves injured, we experience a lot of emotional responses and a lot of psychological responses. And on the emotional side, we can go through a significant amount of different emotions. Research and evidence has likened it to experiencing and going through a grieving process, where we experience kind of anger, sadness, feelings of frustration, and even depression. So we're balancing an injury, which is a setback, a challenge, and then we're going through all this emotional kind of roller coaster at the same time, which can really impact on our ability to rehab effectively and to cope effectively. So we got to try and find a way to manage those emotions. But also on the psychological side, we have certain responses. Now, that might be challenges with our identity. It might be challenges with the fact that we can't be physically active anymore. So we're going through this upheaval, and the psychological side is also really complex and profound. We've got to find a way to manage the identity loss, perhaps if we're going through a significant long-term injury, the fear, the anxiety that exists usually at the start of an injury, and moving towards returning back to sport, or back on the mat, or back in the gym. A lack of confidence as well through that process, because we're now no longer kind of identifying with the thing that we can do anymore. So we We lose that sense of esteem in ourselves if that athletic identity is really strong. And there's loads of worries and concerns about our performance when we'll return back, and what impact that's going to have on our performance. So as you can see, there's a real wide range of things going on here, both emotionally and psychologically, that perhaps we need to kind of unpick and untangle to ensure that we can rehab effectively, but also return in the way that we want to as well.
Yeah. So, okay, starting at the beginning, the athlete has been injured. We've got, I think of a couple girls in my community who they're gearing up for their season. They are on track. They have worked so hard to regain their confidence on certain skills. They're so positive. They're, this force on their team, and then bam, they're out for 6 to 8 weeks. Season is coming, and they're having this sort of why me emotional upheaval. What is the best, what's the best way for a parent to support an athlete during that moment? What are some tips you can give that kid, week 1 and 2 of this, that can sort of set them up for more success as they cope?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I would say that emotional support is really, really key. Just helping those individuals cope with the emotional challenges, and sometimes that can just be by having a space to talk it through. Really, how are you coping with that? What is it that you're feeling at the moment? And just hold space for some of those emotions, not to change or control them, but just allow them to be there. It's completely normal and understandable, but also just to reduce the stigma associated with an injury, or the idea that this is a unique experience. It's a setback, and it's one that many athletes have to face. So if you can find other people that have experienced a similar injury, that have gone through that rehab process or are currently going through it, then that can be a huge support system for you to kind of role model with, and understand a little bit as to what their experience of that injury was. Especially if it's a kind of specific type of injury that maybe isn't common or is quite unique. Finding others that have gone through that provides that connectedness, but also that sense of, this isn't just something that happens to me, this happens to other people too, and they've found a way through it. So that's another thing. But what I would always say, and what I say to all my athletes, is that this is a forced stop. You didn't ask for this, and you most definitely don't want an injury, but this is an opportunity now. This is an opportunity to really kind of find ways of experiencing growth as a consequence of this forced stop. Now, for some, that's really hard to accept, because, you've been taken away from the thing that you love to do. But if we can reframe the way that we think about an injury, we can actually find positive outcomes as a consequence of it. So for mums out there, offering that emotional support, just that space to talk through and address some of those feelings of frustration, anger, sadness, trying to lean on some support, because support is the biggest buffer of stress, and injury is a stressor. So we can find others that experience similar injuries. That would be a huge help. And yeah, just holding that space to kind of reframe the situation and cultivate a positive outlook would really enhance that recovery experience.
Yeah. And that can be a tall order to, because I talk about that with mental blocks and with fear, that this is a blessing. I'll even go so far as to say this is a blessing, because the person that you will become after you have worked through this struggle is a person with a voice. It's a person with confidence. It's a person who knows they can do hard things. It's a person who can help other people. And it's hard to tell a 12-year-old, you're going to be able to help so many people overcome, an ACL tear, whatever it is. They're like, yeah, I just feel bad. And I feel behind. And then you've got all these, but what about my timeline? If I'm going to get to college, I'm now a year behind, or I'm a season behind. Or how do you find the silver lining? How do you kind of help that become a challenge that somebody wants to embrace?
It's really tough. It is really tough. And what I'm hearing is there's two things. Firstly is the what ifs, or the thinking that's going on for us in that moment of setback, and those thoughts of I will never get to X, Y, Z, I'm going to be behind now. And all those thinking lead to the way that we feel, some kind of negative emotions, but they're all based around expectations that we should be there, or that we should be going somewhere. If it wasn't for this injury, that we should have the opportunity to compete in XYZ, but they're just our own expectations that we're putting on ourselves. So trying to rebalance that a little bit and adjust them, because we're using maybe old expectations, previous expectations that we've held about something, and those timelines are quite maybe rigid, understandably, because it's their goal, they're attached to our goals and our ambitions and what we want to achieve in our sport and in our career. But we've got to readjust them, especially with a long rehab journey like an ACL injury or something with a significant amount of time out. We've got to just sit down first and foremost and say, are these expectations realistic for what we want, based on our return, based on where we want to go in our career? What are we expecting of ourselves right now? And is that leading to some of the frustrations, some of the feelings that are going on? And can we just readjust and reset those slightly?
Yeah, that expectations I've noticed are the anti self-trust. If you're attempting to trust yourself in your sport, you can't also be expecting a certain score or a certain outcome, because it propels you out into the future, into a place that you can't control, versus being in the moment and going, well, let's just try this next turn, which of course that will build on itself to give you much more success than being stuck out in the what ifs and the expectations and the over trying and the pushing too hard. And I imagine that this also would lead someone to attempt to get back too quickly to their sport.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's go back to the sort of the middle. So we're in this place of maybe we're depressed, maybe we're a little angry, but we're starting to accept it. We're doing our conditioning, showing up and being with the team as much as possible. Hopefully the what ifs are subsiding and we're just trying to be present, get real strong on that conditioning and be a great teammate. What's the best thing that the athlete and the parent can do, during that sort of middle month where that can set them up for the maximum success when they return?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think trying to maintain that positive mindset, be open in terms of their communication, keeping all lines of that communication going, whether that's with their therapist, their physical therapist, whether that's with their psychologist or their mental coach, just having that open dialogue and just continuing to celebrate the small wins, recognize and celebrate each of those accomplishments, no matter how minor, whether it's being able to walk a few steps again or regain some mobility, or handling the psychological challenges of recovery. Just having those small moments, those small wins, just keeps you in that process, keeps you engaged and involved, and keeps that motivation up, but also that kind of positive mindset and optimism, because especially with rehab, there's a lot of ups and downs, and we could have those moments at any time during that trajectory. So especially in the middle stages when things are just kind of going along, but maybe you don't feel much progression in what it is you're doing, and it's just feeling mundane and boring and the same old things that you're getting through. Just trying to find those small wins, and visualize success. Do the mental reps. If you can't do the physical reps, find a way to occupy your mind in a way that keeps you involved in your sport, in that activity, and do the mental reps. There's a lot of evidence and literature out there that says visualization and imagery can really help with the recovery process. We know about its function with performance, but even with the recovery process, we can use positive mental imagery to go through and think about the way our body is healing, but also those mental reps of the performance can be a motivator and a confidence builder as we go through that stage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating to read about how imagining the healing process actually has been shown to speed the healing process. It's very, yeah, it's very cool. Imagery is like this mind magic from my perspective. There's so many applications, and for an injured athlete, definitely something worth considering adding to your newfound space. If you're only training for 1 hour instead of 4, you've got some time in there to really invest in those mental reps. Okay, now this brings me to the idea that a lot of parents go, oh, well, my kid's injured, so they can't train, so we're not going to work on training her mind until she can get back in, and train the mind alongside training the body. And I hear this all the time. Oh, we're going to, we'll take a pause on mental training because she's injured and she can't train. So talk to me about the importance of that mental training and what that can do to support this sort of middle, big question mark. What's the next scan going to look like? How does your work support the kid through sort of the roller coaster in the middle?
I would say that it's even more integral when we're injured, because we might be losing a coping strategy here in the activity, in the sport that we're doing. It could be a stress reliever, it could be an opportunity to socialize. We know social support is a big buffer for stress. And injury itself is a big stressor, and can also lead to more challenging mental health kind of concerns. So I think having a psychologist, having a mental coach, doing that training is really, really integral during those stages, because we no longer have that coping skill that we used. But also, if we look at injury from a growth perspective, with that optimism, with that positive thinking, it's a huge opportunity that we've got here to challenge ourselves in new ways, to grow and learn in new ways, both psychologically, socially, physically as well. So given that there's a hard stop, might not be training anymore, there's certainly a lot of work we can do psychologically and mentally to keep ourselves involved, but also to learn and to develop those skills, so that when we do go back into performance, we've got a tool set here that we can now add and apply. So yeah, I would say from a wellbeing perspective, it's massively important to keep involved, at least have those support structures in place, because injury, going through rehab, can be isolating. So keeping involved in the process and having people in your corner just to support you through that is huge. But also, given the hard stop, it's an opportunity to grow and learn and develop in other ways. So why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Okay. So you talk about the coping skills, the toolbox. So we talked about imagery a little bit. What are some other tools or sort of coping strategies that you can share with us, however briefly, that can just give kids some ideas of, if I am sinking into a big feeling, or if I am feeling like this injury is sort of overtaking me mentally, what's something that they can lean on to cope? Do you have any sort of favorite tips?
Yeah, I spend a lot of my time working around just this one thing called acceptance, and I base a lot of my practice around acceptance and commitment therapy. But a big part is just acceptance. It's just this ability and kind of way in which we can just accept what's going on for us, and through acceptance we let go of resistance. Now, as human beings, as athletes, as any individuals going through injuries or any challenges, it's often our resistance to that creates more suffering, if you like, creates more negative feelings associated with it. So I would say radical acceptance is one strategy which I think works quite well. And that is really just to remind people, first and foremost, that in this moment, reality can't really be changed, right? There are causes for this outside of our control. And then the next thing is to get them to think about what they would do if they were able to accept what's happened to them. So thinking about what they were able to do if they accept their injury, and imagine what things would be like if they accepted that situation. And then I would introduce kind of relaxation strategies, mindful practices, self-reflection and journaling, just to understand emotions, to feel emotions in a safe way and make room for them. And then I would offer and invite people to observe how those emotions really resonate in their body. Is there tightness? Is there pain? Is there any restriction? And then know that through acceptance, life can be worthwhile, even when experiencing some of these negative emotions. So what we're doing there is just allowing for them, not trying to push the ball underwater, so to speak, but just allow them to come and go. And in doing that, we find it enhances our emotional agility, our ability to just learn and label our emotional states and notice what they're telling us and what really matters to us. And the more we do that, the more we're able to not let those emotions consume or control us. So I definitely would work on acceptance or radical acceptance. Any stress reduction techniques like relaxation, deep breathing, mindfulness, meditation, anything that's going to help reduce that stress response, because we know that injury is a potentially stressful situation for athletes. So if we can reduce that stress response, we can find things less threatening and kind of slow down those alarm bells in our brains that are going off at any moment. And then the other one I'd recommend is just encouraging that social network, that social support to enhance well-being, to keep involved, and to reduce any stresses.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I'm thinking about, the 12-year-old who's going through this big, grown-up thing sort of that they're having to deal with, this massive disappointment. And you and I are real grown-ups. And so we know that life will hand us disappointments from time to time, big ones sometimes, big devastating disappointments. And if I were to know that one of my girls, I have two little girls, had a situation like this when they were 12 that taught them how to accept hard things, how to cope with their emotions, how to deal with stress, that they could look back and go, that felt like something I couldn't do. Like it was too big and too hard and too scary and too unfortunate. And it's in their rearview mirror and they're able to return to sport and find their love and be a leader and, and find their path again. Oh, like what a gift that kid will have had that experience. It's like, ooh, gives me goosebumps. Like what an incredible gift to be able to go through that. So I think for any parents out there who just want to protect their child from this experience and fix it and make the feelings go away and, put a Band-Aid on it and go, quick, fix my kid, somebody. I think you might not want to take that experience from them, that you're there socially, you're setting them up for success, you're allowing them to have these tools, but then to actually, the parent needs a certain level of acceptance too, that this is a valuable challenge that my baby is strong enough to handle.
Absolutely. And that rings true in so many levels, because as human beings, we tend to want to kind of get rid of those really negative emotions and not experience them. But it's often our attempts to get rid of them that creates that real struggle and that arm wrestle with them, or that tug of war. And if we can just know that we probably can't, despite our efforts, get rid of those unwanted emotions, but we can allow them and accept them. And in doing that, we're actually reducing suffering, and we're knowing that it's completely a human experience to go through these emotions. If we can be okay with them, then we can hold space for other people, for our little ones, for our kids, and anyone listening, just for your kids, just to hold the space for those emotions and let them feel them in a safe way. And the best way to do that is to talk them through, is to just have that space. What is that emotion? What is it telling you? And the fact that you're feeling that emotion, wow, that means that this really matters to you, what you're doing. So that's incredible already. So now let's work on how we can just allow for these emotions, and not try and avoid them. Avoid, what we call avoidance coping, is one of the most common ways in which anyone on this planet tries to manage difficult situations, and often it doesn't always work. And if we can add to our coping ability by a few different skills there, and acceptance being one of them, well, then, this experience going through injury and rehab and returning eventually, you've added a skill set which you can use in so many other situations as well.
Yeah, I think of it like a plastic soda bottle. So imagine you got your bottle of Sprite, and you're all full of emotions. You're sort of shaking it up, and all of the avoidance is just sort of like shaking it up and shaking it up and shaking it up. And I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And just, I don't want to feel this way. I don't like this, that resistance that can happen. I don't want to accept this. This is not okay. This is unfair. It's sort of just like that like pressure that's created. And there's going to be a moment where you open the lid up and it goes everywhere, and it gets all over everybody and all over everything, and everything feels, versus going, like just loosening the lid a little, like let a little out.
Yeah.
Let a little out, like in a journal with your parent. Feel your feelings, let your brain is sending you messages and sensations in your body. So if you listen and go, brain, what do you got? What is that? Oh, that feels interesting in my chest. Whew, that's uncomfortable. Just to have that moment, then your brain, it's sort of like, I think of this dialogue, your brain goes, are you listening? Yes, I'm listening. Okay, thank you for listening. And then it can lift. And it's like that emotion doesn't have to stay in your soda bottle. It's now to the point where you can finally, eventually take that lid off and trust that you're not going to, freak out at your mother, or, quit your sport in a rage, or, you're able to look yourself in the mirror. You're able to feel the feelings, accept the feelings, experience the discomfort in your body, emotional and physical. And then you get to the point where you've got this peace and this ability to, encounter these big situations.
Absolutely. And what you're doing there is you're responding instead of reacting, because you've acknowledged those emotions and what they're trying to tell you to do, because every emotion has its kind of urges. It's telling you to do something. When we're fearful, it might tell us to avoid, or when we're angry, it might tell us to shout and attack. So all of these emotions are telling us to do something. But if we can just tune into that and kind of hear what it's telling us, what signals it's sending, then we can then, create that space to then choose how to respond. And that is a kind of emotional agility that we're learning there. And that's such an effective skill, and an incredible ability to be able to harness over the life course. So yeah, I think that rings so true. And it would be amazing, when you're going through rehab and an injury, to harness that skill, because it will help in so many other situations as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so now let's say we're nearing return. We've been riding the roller coaster. We found acceptance. It's starting to even feel like, okay, this is okay. I'm getting better. I'm healing. And then, it's time to go back and do the vault, or it's time to go back and do that release again on the bars, or it's time to go tumble again. There's naturally going to be an increase of fear. And how do you recommend people approach themselves during this phase, or approach the return in a way that will allow them to have the most success?
Yeah, I think fear of re-injury, or that fear around returning, is one of the biggest areas that I work in. So I think also just lean on that acceptance that you've harnessed through the way, but also try and find ways to maybe navigate that fear earlier on, kind of forward coping, because you're going to return. And if that's the first time that you're returning into the gym, or into the arena where you perhaps got injured, then it's going to bring up that fear response. It's going to bring up some anxiety for you. So maybe just have that gradual exposure throughout your rehab to give you an opportunity to expose yourself to that situation, so you can calm those alarm bells going in the brain that tell you that there's danger around, because your brain is going to hold on to that memory, that moment where you've injured yourself, and it's going to alert you to situations that come up that might be similar to that, because it's just trying to protect you. We understand that, we know that. So let's try and give ourselves an opportunity to expose ourselves to that environment. We don't even have to do the activity, but sometimes for athletes, it's just turning back up to where it was that they got injured, just to familiarize themselves with that equipment, with that space, with that area. Just get a feel for it again, slowly, by slow steps into it, then build that up, and maybe use and utilize imagery as a way to do the mental reps as well. And it takes practice, because for a lot of athletes, they go initially to the negative side of imagery, the visualizing what happened, that fall, that injury. So it takes a bit of time to practice that positive outcome associated with it. But if we can do those mental reps and rehearse that, we can build our susceptibility up to that fear, lower that fear response. And it's our best way to build that confidence into that return. And confidence is the antidote for that re-injury anxiety that we might experience, or that fear of re-injury.
Yeah. It's basically like your brain has said, well, that skill is a hot stove. We don't touch hot stoves. We don't walk into oncoming traffic. We don't walk off cliffs. We don't tumble. Period. That's just, the brain has sort of decided, okay, that's not safe. We don't do that anymore. And if you were to walk into oncoming traffic, you would freeze, which is good. If you were about to burn yourself, your brain would freeze you. So if you go into this situation where your brain goes, oh, no, last time something bad happened, we're going to freeze here. That's good. We want that. We want our brains to work effectively, but we also want to then show the brain, actually, this is not a hot stove. This is something that is safe, that we can train, and it takes a lot of repetitions, because that memory of that trauma is going to dig deeper into the brain than those 100,000 successes that also happened on that skill over time. So I love, the idea of baby steps, easing in, systematically desensitizing the fear, and also not like not pushing yourself into oncoming traffic, because that just makes it worse. If you're trying to battle with that freeze response in a way that's not compassionate or patient, that, in my experience, just makes it worse. So how do you like to guide people in knowing their limits, and knowing, sort of how fast to return and where to back off? Because I think it's an important thing that people can kind of miss in the impatience of getting back on their timeline.
Yeah, I think you touched on a word there, that compassionate lens. That self-compassion, I think, is so important throughout injury rehabilitation and return. Having that just that kind voice, rather than that critique, just to help guide you through that, and knowing that your emotions, your emotional response has a pretty good function, and there's an evolutionary reason for it. These emotions are messengers, but they're also good counselors in some sense. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, that fear response, whether we were to fight or flee or freeze when there was danger, was appropriate. So just knowing that those emotions are appropriate, they have a function, evolutionary, as human beings, they're there for a reason. They can be important messengers. So just to extend that compassion to yourself in the way that you treat others, with that kindness and just that common humanity approach, knowing that this is completely normal. And for every single athlete that I've ever worked with in my career has experienced some anxiety, some fear response when they're returning, and it's absolutely normal. And taking those baby steps, taking that small gradual exposure to what it is that you're doing again is okay. But knowing what's okay for you in your own limit and capacity. So making sure that those expectations are, balanced and fair, and you're being honest with yourself, but that you're being compassionate, you're being kind. And in doing that, we're also accepting that, these emotions might be tough when we return, but we'll just take it step by step to get through that.
And so we've already talked about the benefit of the, learning to ride the emotional roller coaster through the rehab process. What would you say is the big opportunity in returning and working through that fear? How does, what's the silver lining there that makes kids not just able to cope, but actually better on the other side from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I would say firstly that the going through an injury is a stressor, and our experience of stresses is what determines our kind of stress response. So the more of those kind of stresses that we're subjected to throughout our career, the more they inform how we respond to future stresses. So the fact that we have got through this injury and returned, we have developed coping skills and a coping style to manage and navigate that. And that's going to set us up in the future. So there is opportunities here that we're going to grow and we'll learn, but we've already added to our coping skill set, if you like, which is going to reduce and minimize that stress response in the way that we appraise certain situations as stressful, and the kind of physiological changes that happen to us as a response as well. So we're kind of building a preventative framework, not one that we chose to build, but one that we've been kind of forced to build through an unwanted stop and unwanted injury. So first and foremost, there's our ability to cope based on the stresses that we face. So this experience is going to help support us in the future with future stresses that we face. But that ability to manage and navigate fear, and the way in which we cope with that, whether that's through gradual exposure, through the way in which we take those small steps back into activity, we're building and developing a way to manage some really heavy emotions. And those emotions might come up in any moments in our life. So I would say it's incredibly beneficial experience to be able to develop ways in which to navigate that fear and that anxiety. And those emotions are kind of heavy negative emotions, if you like, that we're going to experience. So the way in which you do that can carry forward for future injury prevention, but also, in the way in which you navigate life outside of sport as well.
And so yes. I'm like thinking back to when I failed out of college, my first year in college, fun fact. And I sort of had this, mental injury. I felt like I can't do it. I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I just can't do it. And so when I decided to go back to school, I took one class. I just took one class, was like, let me just take one class and see. And I kept being like, it's too hard. I can't do it. And I had social support that went, just take the one class. I can't, I'm going to quit. I have to withdraw. And she's like, well, why don't you just go tomorrow? And then just don't quit today. Just go tomorrow. And then, I finish that class and get an A. And then I take two classes. And the whole time it's like, this is so hard. I don't think I can do this. And I have social support that's like, just go tomorrow. Just do the reading and go tomorrow. And, that framework that came from that failure got me this incredible GPA and this, I all the way through to a master's degree, which I never would have thought. So I think anybody who's, in that place where you're like, well, I can't, it's too hard. You get that experience of going, well, just go tomorrow. And maybe you're on the low beam, and maybe you're on the low beam all month, but you just go tomorrow and you get social support and you communicate with your coach and you let your team build you up. And you're going to be able to look back on it and go, whoo, that was crazy. That was hard. But you can go, oh, if I just go tomorrow and just sort of see what happens, that you can essentially do anything in life, I think, with that framework. Anything. anything that you could concoct, you can do, whether like, let's just show up tomorrow and just do the little sliver you can handle tomorrow. And then the rest will sort of reveal itself. Lack of expectations, sort of this curiosity and this determination that's, from my perspective, fueled by, the support squad underneath you that keeps going like, yes, you can, kiddo, we got you. You can do this.
Yeah, that's such a great way of looking at it, and just breaking it down and making it achievable and feasible and something that you can do, in a small but significant way. And then it builds that momentum. You take that first step today, then maybe tomorrow you can take another one, and then the next day 2 steps, and before you know it, you've climbed that hill, which then turns into a mountain, but you've got over it. And you look back and think, wow, I did do that. I don't know how, because I didn't believe in myself for that first step, because it seems far too achievable, far too unobtainable even, to climb that mountain. So yeah, one foot in front of the other can sometimes just be the best way to build that momentum and make it feel, obtainable. And sometimes those unrealistic, really vague goals are sometimes what holds us back. With a lot of athletes that I work with, there's this idea that, when I return, I'm going to want to do X, Y, Z. And I'm also going to feel a certain way when I return. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be back to my old self. And, for some of them, that return might be 12, 18 months down the line. So to push all of those nice emotions to the future, so far away, it just creates a sense of we're only going to experience the negative ones until then. So this whole kind of what we call the arrival fallacy of, when I climb Everest, I'm going to feel like the top of the world. When we get there, we don't, because we feel just other things. And those emotions have been pushed even further into the future. So bring them back to now, see what we can enjoy in that moment. See if we can celebrate that first step that we've taken, and really just feel the positive emotions associated with it and engage in it. And if we can engage in that small win, it becomes a deep win, and because of the experience it gives to us, and that builds that positive feeling, that positive mindset to keep going. So yeah, I love the way that you frame that. And I think so many people listening, or athletes out there, can really gain something from that by just breaking down what it is they have to do into what they need to do today to take a step forward.
Yeah. Oh, and the gratitude in the moment, because even if if you got a bum ankle, you got hands that work. You've got a mind that works. There's always a different perspective you can take, that there's something that is working. There's something that is healing. There's something that is moving forward, if you just take the time to look at it. Oh, well, Dr. Carl Bescoby, thank you so much. What a beautiful perspective that I think is going to help so many people. If they want to follow you or get more from you, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Been really, really great having this conversation. And if you want to follow me, check out my Instagram at The Injury Psychologist, or my website, which is also theinjurypsychologist.com. And yeah, just feel free to connect and reach out. You're not on your own in any of what you're experiencing and going through. And, there's so many people out there that have either experienced an injury or helped support someone with an injury. So, just knowing that there are others out there that you can lean in towards can help you along the way. So do connect and reach out if that's you. We're here, we're listening, and I think we both hear what people are going through and experiencing when it comes to injury, and how tough it can be.
Yes, you are not alone, and we've got you. Thank you so much, Carl. It's been such a pleasure.
And you, thank you.